All right, good evening and welcome to this week's installment of Thursday with Jamila. For those of you that, isn't it mighty? This hat is so mighty. I picked it up here recently. That one too. I don't know which one you like, but I love them both. We are going to talk about the relational factor tonight. So I think this is something that we should make sure that we get our notes, bring in all the people that we feel could benefit from having this conversation. I want to talk about, are you a friend or are you a foe? And actually put it in context as it relates to what a friend is, what a foe truly is as it relates to my studies. So I hope that you guys are ready to dive in tonight. I want to jump right into it. And the first thing that I want to read is a quote that I found that I thought was just really impactful. When I read it, I was just like, yeah, this is really good. So I like this quote. It's by Leo Biscaglia, and I'm sure I didn't say their name right, but let's just listen to the quote. It says, "A loving relationship is one with which the loved one is free to be himself. To laugh with me, but never at me, to cry with me, but never because of me, to love life, to love himself, to love being loved. Such relationship is based on freedom and can never grow in a jealous heart." And I really feel like that quote sets the tone for what I want to talk about this evening when it comes to the relational factor. We've been talking about goals. We've been talking about intentions. We've been talking about addressing our whys. We've been talking a lot about laying the foundation to ensure that the days ahead are everything that we want them to be. But of course, we cannot do that without proper planning. Also, we cannot do that unless we are surrounded with the right people. And often we just assume that I can do it because it's what I am born to do. I can do it because it's what I've been called to do, which is always great. But there's a people factor that can never be negated when we are deciding to move forward in the direction of our purpose, when we're deciding to move in the direction of our dreams. So tonight I want to talk about that. And so I want to talk about first and foremost why relationships matter. And at any given point, you guys can chime in with your points and your thoughts. I'm happy to speak to those in real time. Maybe you guys have some additional insight that will make this conversation even more meaningful. Okay. So when we talk about why relationships matter, in the grand scheme of things, human beings are created for community. It's in our DNA. We want to be surrounded with community. Okay. Relationships that we form play a critical role in our mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being. So if you think about it, when we're surrounded by people, the people that we decide to do life with, the people that we allow to journey with us, every person that is playing a role of any sort in our life has an impact on our mental, our physical, our spiritual, and our emotional well-being. Okay. All of those people are contributing factors. And so if we're not careful, the people that we are allowing in our space can be impacted in a negative way or in a non-fruitful way, however you choose to look at it, or in a meaningful way. But you've got to be one that's taking inventory of those that you are allowing to be in that space with you. Okay. Honestly, we need people. And people need us. And we can only be who we need to be for people, and people can only be who they need to be for us when we make sure that people are assuming proper roles in our life. And that's why I put a tagline, are you a friend or foe? Because sometimes we are giving people titles, one, that they're not worthy of, nor are they trustworthy of. We're just allowing people to encompass roles in our lives because they've been there for a certain period of time. Or we assume that, the best that we see in them will be the best that they present to us. And so we just allow people to be in our space because that's what we've always done. And one of our dear friends is saying that I don't need them. And we know that they're not telling the truth here. You need people. You absolutely need people, and people need you. Okay. So there are some studies that would suggest that our very survival is hinged on our relationships or lack thereof. And if we think about that, think about just some people who have been on the brink of breakdowns, or even yourself. You've been in a place where you really didn't feel like you could take another step ahead. Life was just weighing heavily on you, but you were able to place a phone call to somebody who you knew would be able to speak to the core of you, or you were able to go out to dinner and just not have to think about it. And in the moment, your whole mood was transformed because of the company that that you were keeping. All of that matters. This is why we cannot just allow people to take up idle space in our lives, because there may be critical moments. And if you're not surrounded by the right people in those moments, it can be to your detriment. Okay. And I know that I'm talking fast, but this is a topic that I'm sincerely passionate about, because I do not believe in allowing people to occupy space simply because they've always been there, or simply because it's too hard to allow people to evolve and go on to other relationships because we're selfish and we still want to cling to them. We have to be mindful of the company that we keep. And if the company that we keep is not pushing us in the direction that we ultimately want to go in, then that is company that we no longer need. Okay. And to the point that where some people feel like, well, I don't need people. We do. And when we start to withdraw from people and we pull ourselves into corners and we only listen to the sound of our own voice, that is breeding ground for depression, anxiety, all of those negative feelings, because at this point, you have no voice or reason outside of your own. And if you're in a place where you're not at your best emotionally or mentally, it's really hard to speak life into yourself. And this is where those people who are supposed to be in your circle serve a vital and critical role. So no isolation. Yes to new friends. Yes to new relationships. Yes, we are saying yes because we need to open our hands and extend our hands in the direction of the people that were ultimately supposed to be there. Okay. So let's talk about what a healthy relationship encompasses. Okay. So when we think about a healthy relationships, some of the telltale signs that the relationship that you're engaged in are those that you should be is when you're able to remember the important details in one another's lives. Like if you think about it, on certain days, there's just certain people that you expect to hear from. When there's a certain occasion that pops up, there's some voices that your day is incomplete until you hear from. Right? They remember your favorite color. They remember your favorite fruit. They remember your favorite drink at Starbucks, whatever that is. These people remember the details. Okay. Those are signs of healthy relationships. These are people that you share important details with, and these are people who share important details with you, right? They listen attentively. You know you're in healthy relationship with people when they can listen attentively and not just listen to respond or listen to cast judgment, but they are actively engaged, fully present in whatever conversation is being had. That's a sign of a healthy relationship. When you can't get a word in edgewise, or you can definitely tell people are just listening to respond, or they're really hoping that you would get on with it, maybe that's not somebody that you should be calling friend. Okay. And there is a sign of mutual respect. When there is a lack of respect in a relationship from either party, that relationship is not healthy. If we cannot respect one another as individuals, I am not saying that we have to agree with everything that that person is saying or doing, but there is a respect for them as a human being. That's where relationships and healthy relationships foster. Where there is no respect, there needs to be some disengagement, because we cannot be involved in relationships where we cannot at least learn to respect one another. I don't care what the nature of the relationship. I don't care if it's a coworker, if it's a family member, if it's an in-law, if it's a distant cousin. I don't care what it is. There should always, always be respect in healthy relationships. Okay? Openly communicating. Another sign that you are in a healthy relationship is when you can have open communication in the absence of judgment. If you are in relationship with people and you know that every time that you open your mouth, they are casting judgment, either verbally or non-verbally, might not be the relationship that we should be classifying as a friend, because that's not what friends do. Friends do correct, but they correct in love. Friends do say, hey, we may need to rethink that or pull the brakes on that. But judging someone and condemning someone, that is very different. And so we can love people into their best selves. We can help people become who they are trying to become. But while we are allowing people to evolve, one thing that I think is important for us all to remember remember is we all had a learning curve. There was something that every single one of us had to overcome. And in order to overcome, that means we have to journey through the process of ridding the old behavior and adopting a new behavior. And that does not happen overnight. So if you're in a relationship where there's communication with no grace, that is not a healthy relationship. And that's not someone that should fall into the friend category. Okay. I am speaking from experience. There are some people that I'm just not going to have certain conversations with. There are certain people that I may not be able to bring to the table per se, because they may not be prepared to handle all of me. And that's okay. It doesn't make them a bad person. It just means that they don't have the capacity necessary for me to be me with them. And you have to have discernment for that. I think oftentimes we find ourselves disappointed and find ourselves having to delete people, rid people, or get people out of our lives because we misclassified them because we were lonely. We have to take accountability. We were lonely and we decided to forge relationships with people because we needed someone. But just because you need someone doesn't mean you should accept everyone. Needing someone is not an excuse to accept everyone. You should be in relationships with people who have the capacity to handle you. Everybody can't handle you at full proof. They just can't. And so that's not really someone that we should just call friend. I see it a lot in the church community. Hey, sis. Hey, bro. Hey. Okay, I get it, right? Because we are brothers and sisters in Christ, but we just throw titles around loosely. And when we throw those titles around, we have expectations of those people. And when they don't live up to those expectations, one, because we probably didn't really set clear expectations with them to figure out, is this who you can be to me? When they failed us, we then started to feel like, and this is why I don't get close to people. And this is why I don't form new relationships. Well, some of that is something we have to take accountability for. We have to take accountability. So when we are classifying people, let's make sure we're looking at their capacity. Can they handle you? Okay. Also, when you are in a healthy relationships, the people involved in those relationships make time for one another consistently. Okay, whatever consistency looks like for you all in that relationship and you guys are all comfortable with, that is a sign of a healthy relationship. It cannot be only calling one another when you're in dire need of something, because as I said earlier, we remember important details about one another. We're fully invested in one another. And so making sure that time is allocated for one another on a consistent basis is paramount when we are talking about being in healthy relationships, right? Because we make time for what we value. And where there is a lack of value, there will be a lack of time spent. But if I say I value you, if I say you matter to me, I clear schedules for you. I make room for you because you matter. And I want to feel the same when it comes to me. So it's a symbiotic relationship. Okay. If it's only you giving out the time, that's parasitic. They're leeching off of you. They're draining and they are depleting you. And this is again why we don't feel like we can be engaged in relationships, because we're not getting out of it what we need or desire. Okay. Hey, y'all. My nephew is on Instagram. Hey, nephew, I see you. So that's another way to gauge, am I involved in a healthy relationship? Okay. What are some of the benefits of healthy relationships, Jamila? Why should I care? One of the top reasons is less stress. And who doesn't want less stress in their life? Listen, the Northwestern Medicine research states that being in a committed relationship is linked to the production of less of the stress hormone, which is called cortisol. So when I am engaged in a healthy relationship, my body is producing less of the stress hormone. Why does that matter? Because that's a health thing. That, like, when we're producing all of those toxins in our body, it has negative effects on us. So when we are engaged in those relationships, and I'll just venture to say, the reason we're less stressed is because we're openly communicating with people in the absence of judgment. People are remembering important facts about us, and we're doing the same for them. We're spending time doing healthy activities together. So the things that probably would have stressed me, we've been able to talk through and move beyond and go on to do something that is more worthwhile. So there are benefits to this. Never forget that. Another benefit of being in healthy relationships is having a greater sense of purpose. And I'm going to spend a little bit more time on that because this is where I think relationships reach their peak. When we are in relationships with people who see us beyond today, and no matter what today brings, are able to continue to see us beyond today and push us in the direction of the purpose and the person that we will ultimately become, we start to gauge a greater sense of purpose because now I am surrounded by people who, one, see the truth of me. And when I start to believe the lie that I'm not good enough, that I'm not capable, those people see the truth and they speak back to me what I need to hear to ultimately pull me out of the rut that I am in, because they know, listen, you may have missed the mark today, but there's another opportunity. Also, the day's not over. You may have missed the mark at 3:00. We've still got time in the day to get ourselves out of the rut and do something meaningful with the time that we have remaining. We need people like that who see us beyond our greatest mistake, who understand that you failed, but you are not a failure, who understand that greater is you. You're greater than this. You're bigger than this. You're more capable than this. It's just a moment. And I'm not going to let a moment in time define you forever. You got to have people in your circle that can speak to you that way. And I think one of the things that we should always be remembering, our relationships reveal the fruit of our impact. I wrote that and it spoke volumes to me because I just recently celebrated a birthday. And although people were saying happy birthday, a lot of the posts that I received talked about who I had been to them. And I think that that was probably one of the greatest gifts that I could have received, because ultimately I've only wanted to live a life that was going to be impactful and that was going to help people through trying times and celebrate them in their highs and remind them that there's still more time ahead and there's still more steps to go and you're capable. And when I read those birthday posts, I was completely overwhelmed because I was to people things that I didn't even realize. And I had made an impact and continue to make impacts beyond what I had even known. And so this is why you've got to be able to measure the fruit of your relationship. There should be some fruit. There should be something positive. There should be some growth in both you and those that you are in relationship with. Where there is no growth, is that a friend or is that foe? And oftentimes, in order for us to assess that, we've got to take a step back and do some assessments and look at, is this a profitable thing or is this a convenient thing? Is our relationship really just the crossing of similar schedules, or is our relationship because we both have a piece to one another's purpose? And when we plug and play, we both grow, we both succeed. We are going eons beyond where we are today. Misclassification of relationships will be our demise. So let's look at it for what it truly is, call it what it truly is, and then we grow and foster those relationships. And then I had mentioned capacity earlier, and sometimes you also need to understand, what is your capacity? I'm trying to read your post. Okay, so I have a question. It says, what do you do if your love for a person prevents you from being your best self? Okay, so I got a question online, and I'm going to answer that because here is the truth. At the point where you can't be you, that's dangerous, because then who are you becoming as a result of appeasing someone else? Because they're getting from you what they need, right? And I get that there's love there, but sometimes love has to create distance. Sometimes you've got to distance yourself between those you love because your mental health and your mental well-being is a top priority. And so at the point where I can't be me to love you, to be in relationship with you, we have a bigger problem, because then who am I? And I'm the only person that is going to ultimately have to live with the regret of me not being who I know I am for the sake of someone else. Because their life then is fulfilled. They're getting what they need, but what about you? And is that living, or are you merely existing at that point? And I don't think it's unconditional love when you have to create distance. That's wisdom, because at that point, I've got to create a little bit of distance between you and I, because I cannot fail to be for your benefit. That's toxic. And it's unjust and it's unfair to you as an individual. And if we want to talk more about that, inbox me or call me later and we'll talk about that some more, because I see a lot of people do that. And it's not to say that we don't compromise. So I don't want what I'm saying to be taken out of context. In relationships, there are compromises, right, that have to be made on both parties. We've got to be able to give a little to get a little. Compromising is one thing. Failing to be who you are is a completely different ballgame. And I'm never going to endorse someone not being who they are. I can't do that, because I've been there and I've lived with the regret and the resentment of failing to be Jamila because I felt like I couldn't be her to love you. And that's not a fun place. And it takes a lot of growing, counseling, and journaling. At least it did for me, to get that back, because now you got to go back. Because what happens when the relationship dynamic shifts and you're left with the pieces of who you thought you were? You've got to rebuild, right? And if that friendship falls through or there's a separation, you still ultimately now got to determine, how do I become me again? Because I lost me on the journey. Okay, so let's just think about that. Another benefit of healthy relationships is longer life. So I like to make sure that I have stats and things when I am looking at the points that I want to point out today. And research indicates that having healthy social relationships makes a bigger impact on avoiding early death. It has a bigger impact on avoiding early death than taking high blood pressure medicine. That blew me away. So you mean to tell me that being in a healthy relationship is more impactful than taking high blood pressure medicine? That is insane. That's bananas to me. I read that and was just like, wow. Because I'm always an advocate for community and relationships, but I didn't realize it had that great of an impact on us from a health sense. So just to give you some context. And then it also says that the lack of healthy social relationships is the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So for those of us who feel like, I got this on my own, I don't need anybody, like I got this, and we're going into social isolation, it's the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And we all know what smoking does to our bodies. And so just think about that. So isolation is never the key. Finding the right people is. And we only find the right people sometimes through trial and error. We're going to kiss a few frogs. We are. We're going to find out by some heartbreak and some letdowns that maybe these weren't my people. And that's okay, because we're human. We're figuring this thing out as we go. But I'm bringing it up because as we've talked about all of the subjects thus far in 2020, the piece that is really going to catapult us into where we want to go is the relational factor. We have got to be mindful of those who are surrounding us. It is imperative. If we want to reach our highest potential, we have to be surrounded by the right tribe. We have to, okay? So we've talked about the benefits. I want to talk about the hidden hazards of toxic relationships, okay? And so on the Psychology Today website, they spell out a good example or some good examples of toxic relationships. And it could be in your partner relationship, your friendships, your parent-child relationships, co-workers, and the list goes on. And I'm bringing all of those components out because we all probably fall in a different category. Those of us listening to this are not all walking the same path. So whether it's in a partner, a friendship, a parent-child, or even in your co-workers, being able to identify the factors of toxicity is important, okay? And when we talk about the parent-child relationships, we typically model the upbringing that we were subjected to, good, bad, or indifferent, because we no matter how bad we say, I'm never going to be my mama, I'm never going to be my dad, or I'm not going to be my abusive aunt or whatever, if that was the model that was presented before us, our defaults, if we're not conscious, will be what we've always seen because our brain has categorized that as normal. So when you're engaging in these relationships, one of the things to be mindful of is to think about how you were reared and how you were brought up, and think about the communication and punishment and the corrective measures and the redirecting and things like that that went on in your upbringing. And when you find yourselves in those uncomfortable or toxic environments, think about the behaviors that you are exhibiting, and think about if it's linked to how you were brought up. Because we're so quick to be able to point out what somebody else did and not take into account our behaviors that we are bringing to the situation, maybe unknowingly. I have a really, really bad habit of wearing exactly how I feel on my face and rolling of my eyes. I have been rolling my eyes since one could. And I would roll my eyes so much as a kid, and I didn't even know it was happening until my mom just started popping me in the face like, girl, why you keep rolling your eyes? And it wasn't anything that I was doing intentionally. I wouldn't be angry sometimes. It was just, at that point, it was just a habit. It was just a natural response for me. And so I would be mindful of that, because if I'm in a business meeting, whether I disagree with a client or a coworker or not, rolling my eyes in a business meeting is incredibly unprofessional. So I've got to be mindful of the patterns that I've created growing up and how I am presenting those in certain scenarios. Okay. So toxic relationships are categorized by, listen to this, they're categorized by insecurity, abuse of power and control, demanding individuals, selfishness, self-centeredness, criticism, negativity, dishonesty, distrust, and demeaning comments and attitude. Lastly, jealousy. So when we see those type of characters being exhibited, that is a sign that the environment and the relationship is toxic. If we have to be demeaning, if it always has to be centered around someone's insecurity, we've got to be mindful of that, because even when we want to be a help, we can also be an enabler when we always allow someone's insecurity to guide a conversation or guide a narrative. So you have to be mindful of that, because a lot of times when there's insecurity present, people project, right? And so now they're projecting onto another person what they're ultimately feeling internally, but maybe not brave enough to confront. And so now it's always someone else or what someone else did, when really it's just their insecurity being magnified. Okay. So you got to be mindful of that when you're in relationships. Okay. So how do we change the narrative? Because ultimately I want to give us tools to move beyond the toxicity. Okay. So change the narrative. When you are in a toxic relationship, you first have to be able to admit that it's toxic. How is it toxic? Look at the characteristics that I just outlined. Is there insecurity? Is there abuse of power and control in place? Is there selfishness at play? Is there dishonesty or distrust at play? If we see these characteristics being exemplified, then we have to first be able to admit that this is a toxic relationship. And then once we've been brave enough to admit that it is toxic, we have to believe that we deserve to be treated with love, respect, and compassion. And after step one, we are admitting it, but now we have to believe that we deserve better. And sometimes step two is harder or just as hard as step one, because admitting that something isn't what we hoped it would be is often a challenge. But now admitting aloud that I deserve better than this, because we're ultimately accepting and teaching people. We're accepting what they are doing. And when we accept it, then we're teaching them that what they are doing to us is okay. And so we have to be able to admit, actually, no, this is not okay. And I deserve more than this. And the number one preventer of us being able to say without a shadow of a doubt that we deserve more and better than what we are receiving is hinged on our self-esteem. How do we see ourselves? Most people can't say, I deserve better, because their esteem is so low that they ultimately don't believe that they do. They believe that whatever they've received is the best that life has to offer them. And so they limit themselves from being in environments and surrounded by people who do have more to give them and who would willingly do so if given the opportunity. So how do you see yourself? And understand that how you see yourself matters. Okay. After we've admitted it and we've attested to deserving more, then we have to address it. And the better we see ourselves and the more we come to know and believe that we are deserving of better, the easier addressing toxic behavior becomes, because now you have seen, acknowledged, and accepted your own worth. And when you come into the knowledge of your own worth, you hold that dear to your heart and you make it very challenging for anybody to give you less than what you know you deserve. Because no, I deserve better than this. And what you're giving me does not meet the mark. And since it doesn't meet the mark, I'm going to have to distance myself from you, because you are not going to continue to dump on me what I am not deserving of, nor am I the cause of. Because oftentimes we allow people to dump because we feel like we owe it to them. If you didn't create the issue, you do not have to be the trash bag holding all of it. Okay, so think about that. And then when you are addressing toxic behavior, you do your best to use I statements. That way it's not accusatory and people don't start to become defensive in the middle of your conversation. So you can just tell them, hey, I feel X. When these types of scenarios come into play, I feel like this. They make me feel this way. And so at this point, you're not pointing the finger at anybody. You're explaining to them, though, the impact of what's happening and and the impact that it's having on you. Okay. The final step, should all else fail, if you're, not in a position to admit it, if you can't, say you deserve better aloud and you can't address the behavior, then you have to create distance. You have to create distance, because your mental well-being has to be a priority, and it has to be your priority before it's going to be anyone else's. Before it's going to be anyone else's, your mental well-being has to be your priority. Okay. And so you've got to separate yourself, or at least create distance, until you can get to a place of bravery, because it takes bravery to say I'm worth more than this when you've been accepting of bad behavior from people, when you've allowed them to be toxic and demeaning and insulting, and now say, you know what? No, I deserve better than this. I won't accept less than what I know I'm deserving of. And sometimes that takes bravery and it takes practice. And sometimes we've got to talk to ourselves in the mirror and say, hey, listen, girl, listen, dude, more than this. You deserve more than this. And you're going to get more than this when you first give it to yourself. So a practice is to make a promise to yourself and don't break it. A practice step is to say, I'm going to commit to X for my own well-being on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, and never renege on yourself. Because the more you become familiar with keeping your own promises, the more you are acclimated with being who you need to be for you, you start to show the world around you how they are to engage with you when they come to your table. You are the world's greatest teacher of how to treat you. You are. Absolutely. Okay. And so it's a lot to take in and it's challenging at times, but you are capable of doing it. It's going to take some work. It's going to take some reframing of how you would typically engage with people. It's going to take some failure, because it may not be what you are accustomed to, but the more acclimated you become with anything, the better you are at getting what you need and ultimately producing results that can be long lasting. But it starts with you. So, Jamila, why are we talking about this? Because if we're going to win in 2020, if we are going to accomplish everything that we've written out and laid at God's feet and allowed Him to establish, we definitely have to address the relational factor. And I'm going to end on this. Often we are pulling from people what we need and haven't been able to produce within ourselves. Okay. We tend to gravitate towards people who have personality types that we wish we could embody. Maybe they have accomplishments that we ultimately want to be able to also reach one day. Maybe they have influence or affluence or whatever. And there's something about them that we admire and we would like to be able to emulate. And that's fine. But just make sure that we're not attaching ourselves with people in hopes of them making us better without us first doing the work to be the best person that we know that we're capable of doing. It starts inward. It starts inward. If we're always reaching externally to ultimately be who we need to be, we will always be let down because those people don't go home with you at night. Those voices don't whisper you to sleep. Those in the heat of the moment, at some point in time, we have got to believe enough in us to be able to present the best version of us back to the world and say, this is who I am and this is what I stand for. And we've got to do a better job of putting people in their proper places. They may not be a friend. They may be an acquaintance. They may be an associate. They may be an advisor. They may be a mentor. They may just be someone that you say, hey, hi, and bye to. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when we put titles on people, there's an automatic assumption of expectation because at this point, you're expected to be whatever that title is. And if they don't have the capacity for that, they shouldn't wear the title. And you may have to clear off the table, and it may have to be a table for one for a season until you can see you rightly. And when you start to see you rightly, then you can bring people to the table who complement that. But it is definitely a journey. But I assure you, I do believe it's a journey worth taking. Hopefully tonight you got something about the relational factor that was meaningful, impactful to you. I want to end with this quote by Carl Jung that reads, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both will be transformed." I want you to take tonight to think about the relationship that you are invested in and think about the transformation that has occurred. And if there's been no transformation, if there's no mutual exchange of respect, if we can't communicate openly and honestly, if we're both not growing, if the relationship is parasitic, if you're the only person reaping the benefits of this relationship, if it's one-sided, whatever, take some honest inventory of the relationships that you are involved in, the people that you are expending your greatest resource on, which is your time, and think about, are they in the right seats? And if not, it's time to move the chairs, which is totally fine, guys, because we're growing every day. We're growing in wisdom, knowledge, and understanding by the day. And as we grow, people's roles in our lives may change. We may change in the roles that we play for others. Whatever it is, it should always be an upward stride. We should always be growing in our relationships. Our relationships should always bring out the best in us. They should always allow us the freedom to be us. And if they're not, it's time to do the work and cut off what needs to be cut off so that what should be there has an opportunity to take its rightful place. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye.